The Dark Lord is coming for your chillin'.
Good evening, everyone. Sister Danger here, and tonight I'm going to talk about Ben Shapiro's coverage of Kennedy versus the Bremerton School District. I normally really like Ben Shapiro and the things he says, although I know I differ with him on a number of issues. This appears to be one of them, and I really just kind of thought it was a crappy review of this particular case, Bremerton being in my veritable backyard, so I wanted to just take a little bit more look at this in depth. Before I get to all of that, though, I would like to kindly call your attention, specifically you, Sinatra and Gutenberg and Dave, to the nicely vacuumed floor behind me. I didn't really vacuum everywhere else, just the part you guys can see, because, well, I live here, and so I'm going to do whatever I want. That said, let's go ahead and get down to this. So for those of you who aren't aware what this case is about, it all started back in 2015. A Bremerton, which is a little city that is near here, Seattle, a football coach by the name of Joe Kennedy had a routine of kneeling at the 50-yard line after games with his team to say prayers, Christian prayers. And this activity came under scrutiny in 2015, and it had been going on at that point for about 8 years.
Right, this is the same left that says that if a teacher prays on the 50-yard line, that teacher ought to be fired.
Right off the bat, Ben is already misrepresenting what happened. The coach was not told that he couldn't pray at the 50-yard line, else he'd be fired. He was told that he had to pray in the capacity of a private citizen and not as a public employee of the school district. He was offered private spaces in which he could make his religious observances. He was given the option of praying in the empty stadium after a game and alone, and he refused all of these options. And when asked by the district to not do this, he ignored that request. He continued to do it and was placed on paid administrative leave as a result.
A guy named Joseph Kennedy prayed at the 50-yard line after football games and before them as well. Students frequently joined him. He would also give them religiously oriented motivational speeches. The school district tried to punish him for doing this.
They didn't start by punishing him. They told him first that he could no longer pray in his capacity as a district employee / coach.
So Kennedy sued. He suggested religious discrimination under the First Amendment. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals found the school district had every right to dismiss Kennedy. So there were two legal questions here. Okay, first legal question was he a public employee? Second was, as a public employee, did he violate his job description?
Once again, I feel that Ben is being misleading in this by omitting certain relevant parts of the description. So I'm just going to read to you Kennedy's job description directly from the court documents. Kennedy's formal job description required him to assist the head coach with supervisory responsibilities, adhere to Bremerton School District policies and administrative regulations, communicate effectively with parents, maintain positive media relations, and obey all rules of conduct before players and the public as expected of a head coach, including the requirement to use proper conduct before the public and players at all times. Consistent with his responsibility to serve as a role model, Kennedy's contract required that, above all else, Kennedy would endeavor not only to create good athletes, but also good human beings. One of the parts that Ben does not talk about here, he seems to specifically omit, but it's really very critical. Nobody is calling into question whether or not he's not creating good human beings. What is being called into question here is his adherence to Bremerton School District policies and also the rules of conduct. Now, the school district itself has a responsibility of engendering an environment that's welcoming and inclusive to all of the students of all walks, races, religions, creeds, etc. And that is actually going to be an important point here in just a minute. So in its interest of maintaining a universally inclusive environment, one that did not make certain students or athletes who don't share the coach's particular religious views feel alienated or uncomfortably pressured to participate, the district decided that there should be no belief-based observances under its auspices.
The district suggested these activities violated school board policy that said that, quote, staff shall neither encourage nor discourage a student from engaging in non-disruptive oral or silent prayer or any other form of devotional activity. Okay, this didn't violate that. The guy literally went out to the 50-yard line, knelt down, and prayed. That's it.
Well, no, that obviously wasn't it. The court held that it did violate policy, and Ben seems to want to leave out the reason for that, so I am going to read it to you straight from the documents themselves. The panel held that plaintiff had a professional responsibility to communicate demonstratively to students and spectators, and he took advantage of his position to press his particular views upon the impressionable and captive minds before him. They also held that because the plaintiff's demonstrative speech fell within the scope of his typical job responsibilities, that he spoke as a public employee, and the district was permitted to order him not to speak in that capacity. So yes, he violated board policy because he specifically used his position to impress his personal religious beliefs on a captive student body that was under his auspices as an employee and their coach.
But the school board insisted that Kennedy not allow students to pray with him at all. That he should forcibly turn them away.
Yes, and to use a phrase that you repeat so often, this isn't hard. He himself wasn't supposed to be engaging in that activity. Therefore, the students aren't supposed to be engaging in that activity with him. I went to put on my sleeves because I got a little bit cold, but we are about to get to the part that really starts to rankle me. So remember back when I said that the district had a responsibility to maintain that inclusive environment for all? That is now about to become very important.
So what actually started all of this? What actually started all of this is, of course, he did this 50-yard prayer thing. And the Satanists, being good Satanists, devotees of Satan, suggested they wanted their own right to pray on the field.
So there's a whole bunch here that Ben is leaving out, and I am going to try to fill in some of those blanks and add some context to what he's saying, because the way that he presents this is really very disingenuous, okay? And I want to begin with, first, a little bit of background. So the Satanists that he is referring to is the Seattle chapter of the Satanic Temple, or TST for short. The TST, and I can't stress this enough, it is not any kind of Satan worshiping group. They have nothing to do with in any way considering Satan some kind of godlike or deific figure to which they pay some sort of homage. Zero. That is absolutely nothing to do with this group. They are primarily atheist and agnostic, and in the interest of disclosure, I know this for a few reasons. One, I tend to keep an eye on the various cases that the TST gets involved in around the country, because I find their atheist activism quite interesting and the way that they approach it. Number two, I've actually been to several of their local meetings because I wanted to scope out what their deal was for some video I made actually quite a while ago, and I think I talk about it in that video a little bit. But I've actually met several of these local Seattle TST members in real life. I can speak at least to some extent from direct knowledge and observation about them. Three, if you don't believe what I'm saying, well, then you can go and look right at their website, and it's all pretty well laid out there. If you don't want to believe me and you don't want to believe their website, or a cooperation between those two things, then, well, I'd suggest go ahead and just check them out for yourself and go to one of their public meetings and see what happens there. The one I went to was held in a library, so I feel that it's really important to denote here that these guys really are in no way, shape, or form Satan worshipers. Not that that really makes much of a difference to the fundamentals of this argument, but it's fair to put them in their proper light. Another very significant attribute that Ben is leaving out is that students from the school in which all of this was taking place reached out to the TST and asked them to become involved. Okay, so this is important because the district has that responsibility to see to the inclusiveness and the welcoming environment for all of the students' various beliefs. Okay, so this was a student provoked.
Because obviously there's no difference between Satanists praying on the field and people of Judeo-Christian values praying on the field. Not all religions are created equal in quality.
Well, as it turns out, a religion doesn't have to be equal in quality in order to get equal rights and protections.
They said the speech at issue is directly, at least in part, to the students and the surrounding spectators. It is not solely speech directed to God. So this is really dicey territory the court is getting into right now. They're saying that his prayer was directed as a public school employee at others. Millions and millions and millions of Americans, including many people on the left, wear crosses around their neck. That is a public proclamation of faith. Do you feel preached to every time I wear my yarmulke?
No. Do you normally feel proselytized to by people's clothing and other inanimate objects? If you do, I would suggest seeking help. Inanimate objects are not what is in question here.
And so here's what the court said. And even if he was doing preaching, was it violating his job description?
Yes, because in his capacity as an employee, he does not possess First Amendment protections to effectively preach his religion to others in his capacity as a coach. He is beholden to following the policies of his employer.
Did they have the right to fire this guy? Maybe, but to suggest they have an obligation to fire him, that's what the court's now saying. Not just that they have the right, but they have the obligation.
I don't even know where this is coming from. What he just read is an explanation for why the courts found that the district was within its rights to fire him. It's not a suggestion from the court that the district is obligated.
Because no public school teacher can pray on the 50-yard line without imposing his religious views on others.
Yeah, actually, he totally can. In fact, he can do it when the field is empty and there's nobody around. Then he can pray, and he won't be imposing his religious views on anyone.
Let's make something absolutely clear. That is an imposition of a religious view on others.
No, it isn't. And you know that you are twisting and making a false equivalence of this when you say this. Mandating that he cannot pray to an audience as an employee is not the same as imposing a different religious belief upon him. It is the nullification of religious activity.
That ruling is an imposition of a secular religious view on others.
This drives me nuts. No, it isn't. Secularism is the absence of religion, not a different religion.
It is the imposition of the idea that religion must be disfavored, that the First Amendment must be applied in reverse.
This is so disingenuous. Removing the presence of the religion in this scenario is not the same as actively denouncing it. One is a nullification. It is the absence thereof. Speaking out against it would be denouncing it, would be saying something to its contrary. Further, we know that being able to observe your religion by way of having a talk or prayer or whatever with your God isn't actually your goal here, because if it was, it would be perfectly acceptable to do that someplace in private. What's being argued here, the contention here, is that this can't be done in the public eye. It can't be done in a way that preaches to others, and that's what you're angry about. So much for Matthew 6:5. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. I guess that's it for tonight, everybody. I'm going to put the links to the referenced articles and case and then some into the low bar. Please, if you like this video, do not forget to smash the like button, share it with everybody, and if you really feel generous, you can donate on my Patreon. Shill, because, well, you know, YouTube's screwing everybody these days. So I am going to be off down south for the weekend, and I guess I will see you all on the flip side. Have a good night, guys.